everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. And just to double check, no food and drink in the presentation hall. So if you snuck something in, sneak it out without me seeing. I know. Yeah. This thing sticks out when it hits my belly. I was like trying to get it out of the way. Oh, that's right. Perfect. No, I wanted to push it in a little more. Oh, we're good. All right. All right, I think we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Montclair State University. I'm so glad to have you here. Let me get into the right slide. We're very glad that you made the trip out here this evening. We have beautiful weather. We've held the storms off just for the Collaborative Journalism Summit. I'm just really thankful, yes, for everyone making the trip out here to the School Communication Media building here at Montclair State University. I'm Stephanie Murray. I'm the director of the Center for Cooperative Media here, and we are the organizers of the 2018 Collaborative Journalism Summit. Just a couple of things. I want to talk about a couple of housekeeping items before we get into the program. First of all, I want to thank our sponsors. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to do this conference. They provide financial support and also support in planning. So I really want to especially thank Democracy Fund, Knight Foundation, and Rita Allen Foundation for being our three presenting sponsors. Their support was really critical to bringing everyone here tonight. So thank you so much. Our other sponsors of the conference too, the JSK Fellowship Program at Stanford, Airtable, who's here, they have a booth out in the lobby, Viafora, Ground Source, of course the Dodge Foundation, who gives generous operating support to the Center for Cooperative Media, helps us exist from day to day and year to year. The Mail Her Enterprise, which is a small weekly newspaper on the west side of the country. And of course, Ground Source too, who is helping us collect questions during keynotes tonight. So a few of the housekeeping things I mentioned. Wi-Fi. If you are not on the Wi-Fi yet, here's how you get on it. MSU Guest. So join the network, open your browser, navigate to a web page, and you will click on Don't Have an Account. Also tonight, we are live streaming the program. The live stream is at collaborativejournalism.org/livestream. You can see it there. You can see it on our Facebook page as well. Of course, we will also be live tweeting from Center Coop Media, and the hashtag for the event tonight tomorrow is #CollabJ. So those are a few things I wanted to make sure that you know about. A couple of other things that I wanted to mention before we get started with our keynote as well. As I mentioned, we will be live streaming tonight, tomorrow morning, and the afternoon. We have the live stream running out in the lobby as well, and also in the news lab across the hall. It will be tight in here tomorrow, I know, because more folks who are attending the conference will be here in the morning. So if you need to stretch out, if you need a spot to work, you can still watch the program and work across the hall in our newsroom. We also have team rooms on the first and second floor for anyone who needs to do work or take a phone call. You're more than welcome to duck into one of those team rooms and do that. I think that is about it. Also, I want to thank our student workers. All of our student workers have red Collaborative Journalism Summit shirts on. So if you need anything, please feel free to ask them. They're from Montclair State University and NJIT, so we're very thankful, yes, for having our students here. So now on to the program. Collaboration is really at the heart of what the Center for Cooperative Media is all about. So we're a grant-funded program based at the School of Communication and Media here at Montclair State, and our mission is to grow and strengthen local journalism, especially here for the residents in the state of New Jersey. And we were built upon the ideal that working together makes us stronger than working separately, and that working together in the public interest is better than working separately only in our own interests. This is the second Collaborative Journalism Summit. I know some of you were here last year, and I'm thankful that you made the trip again. We held the first one last year, and it got such a positive response that we decided to hold it this year. Also because collaborative journalism is growing and expanding, and it's not just journalism organizations working together. We think it encompasses journalism organizations working with their communities, with individual community members, community institutions, and other non-journalism organizations as well. And that's continuing to grow, and we think this convening is important to talk about that and further the conversation. And before I turn the stage over, Again, I also want to say thank you to the staff at Montclair State University and the School of Communication and Media who helped us organize the conference. In a moment, I'm going to welcome Keith Strudler up to the stage, who is the director of the School of Communication and Media, who will tell you a little bit about our programs in the beautiful new building that we are in tonight. And I think with that being said, Keith is on his way up. Keith, welcome.
Much. Thank you for the slide as well. Welcome to the School of Communication and Media. I'm Keith Strudler. I'm the director of the school. Now, I'll bring my mic up a little bit. Now, this is my first year, which means I can still feign a bit of ignorance when I make a mistake, but it also means that I come with fresh eyes and I see things for the first time. So the first time I visited campus, I was told about our outstanding Center for Cooperative Media and all the important work they're doing towards building sustainable journalism models, bringing diverse partners together, working with outstanding foundations, doing cutting-edge but accessible research, and to be blunt, fighting for a sustainable media ecology that will ensure truth and democracy survives. It sounded like a heavy lift. But, paraphrasing Han Solo in The Force Awakens, it's true, all of it. The Center for Cooperative Media, through events like these, white papers, vital training programs, and on, is helping to forge a path for collaborative and sustainable journalism in an era of fiscal and technological chaos. For that, Stephanie Murray and her staff and team should be commended. Of course, none of this happens without you, partners in this critical voyage. Collaboration only happens with, well, collaborators. And I'm thrilled so many of you are here to be a part of this event, and more importantly, part of our expanding family of media professionals, academics, and thought leaders. Thank you for your time, energy, and perspective. Now, as the school director, I would be remiss if I didn't also invite you to spend some time touring our spectacular new school facility, which I say without bias is simply the finest academic facility of its kind in the nation. I know speaking in front of a group of journalists, I should be careful from declaring unverified fact, but I encourage all of you as reporters to see for yourself. So please do, don't skip a session, of course, but do give yourself a tour. In these, and I don't know about hallowed, but certainly highly mediated halls, we aspire to train the next generation of journalists, filmmakers, producers, PR and advertising executives, sports broadcasters, and communication scholars, amongst others. Through strong academic programs, meaningful co-curricular programs like the Montclarian newspaper and WAMC radio and Hawk Communications, to name just a few, and of course, our amazing faculty, we work to ensure the academic programming is just as spectacular as the building in which it is housed. We have wonderful, engaged, diverse students who will be the decision makers of tomorrow, a future you are helping to build through events just like these. So, congratulations to Stephanie and our Center for Cooperative Media for what will be an amazing summit. Thanks to all of you for being here. And please contact me anytime with thoughts, ideas, or other ways we can work together. And welcome, of course, to Montclair State University.
Thank you, Keith. Taller than me. So I'm going to welcome Daniela Gerson, our keynote speaker, to the stage. And before I do that, I do want to note that we are working with GroundSource, one of our sponsors I noted earlier, to collect questions during the keynotes tonight and tomorrow. So jot this number down, type this number in your phone. Any questions that you have while Daniela is speaking or during the Q&A, please text them in. And anyone watching on the live stream too, who can't be here tonight in person, please take this number down as well, because you can text in questions from anywhere. It doesn't matter where you're watching the program tonight. And we will try to pose as many of those questions as we can to the panel and to Daniela after the presentation is done. So that's text the word COLLAB, C-O-L-L-A-B, to 201-514-5022. I saw some folks taking photos. If anyone wants to tweet that out, that would be helpful too, because I just thought about that now. So Daniela Gerson is an assistant professor at California State University, Northridge, with a focus on community, ethnic, and participatory media. She's also a senior fellow at the Democracy Fund, one of our sponsors this evening, and a founder of Migratory Notes. Before that, she was a community engagement editor at the LA Times, editor of a trilingual hyperlocal publication, the Alhambra Source, a staff immigration reporter for the New York Sun, and a contributor to numerous other outlets. She recently wrote the article, which I hope many of you have seen if you haven't read fully, How Collaborations Between Ethnic and Mainstream Outlets Serve Communities in the Digital Age, for the American Press Institute. So now I'd like to welcome Daniela and turn the stage over to her.
Thank you, Stephanie. I am so thrilled to be able to be here today with all of you to talk not only about how we can work together better as journalists, but how we can work together better with ethnic media as well. And I'm also so pleased to see many people who I know personally from ethnic media who are here as well. So I'd like to start, who here has worked for an outlet you consider ethnic media? Does anyone want to share some of the outlets you've worked for? Just out of curiosity, call it out, yeah. Hispanic Link. New York Amsterdam News. Any others? Well, I hope that you'll be able to hear later in the discussion something about your experience as well. Who here has been part of a collaboration between mainstream media and ethnic media? So a lot, relatively speaking. Generally, I would say, oh, that slide didn't move. Generally, I would say that collaborations between ethnic media and mainstream media aren't as common as I think they should be. This is something that Carlos Rodriguez, there's Carlos, Carlos and I found in the report that we did for American Press Institute. We spoke with dozens of reporters across the country who had engaged in this type of collaboration. We found some fascinating examples that I'm going to talk about this evening. But we also found a lot of opportunity for further collaborations. Before I get started, I wanted to talk about definitions. What do we mean when we say ethnic media? There are various definitions. The one we're going to use, and which we use in our report, is that it's media produced by and for immigrants, for ethnic, racial, and linguistic minorities, and indigenous groups. That's in contrast to mainstream media, which is media produced by and are produced for the mainstream society, however that is defined in a specific country, or I would add also a specific community at a specific time. And I think what's important in that definition is mainstream shifts, and also what's considered ethnic media sometimes shifts as well. Not everybody likes the term ethnic media. When Carlos interviewed Jorge Ramos, who I would say is arguably the best known Spanish media journalist in this country, he said, I feel strongly that I am a journalist that is part of the United States, and to identify me in another way marginalizes me. In other words, he said that by defining him as an ethnic media reporter, he felt that it put him outside the mainstream and in some way also, well, as you said, marginalized him, made him appear not as good. There's a few reasons that we still use the term ethnic media and think it's a good term while imperfect. One is, first of all, what Ramos, we don't think that it does. Using it marginalizes, and I'll get to that in a moment, though there is a risk of that. Some other terms that are often used are minority media, diaspora media, or immigrant media. Minority media is used in other countries. Anyone have thoughts about why minority media doesn't work as well in the US context, especially in places like New York, LA? It's not minority. It's not in many communities across our country, and soon it's not going to be accurate if we're speaking of minorities as non-white, not nationwide. Diaspora media is another term that's often used, but diaspora's meaning also connects to displacement, and it also connects to the movement of a people where it's a movement from one place to many places, a dispersed movement, which isn't all migrations or all people who are covered by ethnic media. And then I'd put immigrant media as a term that is a subset of ethnic media. So if immigrant media focuses on recently arrived immigrants and media outlets that focus on integration. It's an important role, but I wouldn't say it's as broad as the term that we're referring to with ethnic media. Now, does anyone have an idea of who created the first ethnic media outlet in this country, or what it was? All right, let's start with what nationality did it serve, and let's skip, if we're thinking English language, skip over. Yeah, so after that, let's think of after that. So I'm skipping ahead one. So yes, that's probably correct. Moving one ahead of that or behind, I don't know that for sure, but that could be right and could make this whole premise wrong. But after that, who do you think? What nationality, what ethnicity? Dutch, African, German, yeah. So the Philadelphia Zeitung, 1732, decades before the founding of this country. Who do you think founded it? So Benjamin Franklin founded the first ethnic media outlet. Now, where was he born? He was not born in Germany. And in some accounts of it, this was the downfall. The Philadelphia Zeitung was a short-lived publication. Some of the explanations are that he didn't know enough about German culture. One of the elements of ethnic media is that it's by and for a community. He didn't know the typeset that was popular with German publications at the time. But he did see an opportunity, and he saw an opportunity to tap into this German population that had moved to the United States and wanted a publication that spoke to its needs. There would be 1,000 German publications a century later in this country, and then other ethnic media outlets followed. El Mississippi, now I have to look at my notes, but El Mississippi was founded in 1808, and it was founded in, anyone know where it was founded? New Orleans, yeah. It was founded in New Orleans by Spanish intellectuals. Freedom's Journal, anyone know where that? New York, African-American publication, founded in New York, and I do have to look at my notes for the date, but it was the first African-American publication. And the foreword, yes. So it wasn't at all the first, if you look at these dates. It was pretty early, but it followed. Thank you for that. But if you look at this, which is also interesting, it did follow the German publication, Spanish, and African-American publications in this country. That is correct. It's completely correct. So following the foreword is an example of Yiddish publication. At the turn of the 20th century, there were more than 150 Yiddish publications in New York City area. And the foreword of these publications, the one that is still going and still publishing a Yiddish version as well as an English language version. So who are ethnic media today? Well, I'm glad we got to hear from a couple of people who have worked for a couple of publications. Hispanic Link is still publishing, right? A little bit, okay. They are a wide range of publications. There are multinational media companies such as Univision, Chinese Language World Journal, and Singtao. We're going to hear from a reporter from Singtao later. There are offshoots of mainstream media outlets such as Al Dia, which is sister publication of the Dallas Morning News. There's OI and the Los Angeles Times. Chicago Tribune is also affiliated with OI right now, though it's been affiliated with other Spanish language publications in the past. There are opinion-driven efforts that blur the line between publisher and reporter that are often very small. One example that a student of mine brought up was Al Akbar, which is a Syrian publication in the Los Angeles suburbs. And there are also small advertising-heavy publications. That question of connecting with the community through advertising hasn't ended. El Informador Latino is in southern Indiana. And then there are emerging forms, and there are various blogs about ethnic issues and identities. A couple are Angry Asian Man and Latino Rebels. What brings these disparate media outlets together? I would argue that some common roles do, one of which is advocating for the communities they cover. One thing that came up often when we talked about collaborations between mainstream media and ethnic media is this question of, are ethnic media outlets advocates? Is there an advocacy element? Is there a difference between advocating for your community, bringing up issues that aren't reported elsewhere, that aren't heard, and being an advocate newspaper, which maybe we'll get to more in the discussion. I'd love to hear what our panelists have to say about that. Another is connecting members of a specific group together. And the last is informing, which is often called service journalism, which is a particular role that ethnic media does very well. These three examples are from La Raza, which was a Chicano publication, a Chicano student-driven publication in Southern California starting in the 1960s. The middle is from Jacob Lawrence's Migration series, where he chronicles the role of the African-American press in advocating for people to leave the South for the North. And the final is from Rafu Shimpo, which is LA's Japanese. It's a daily newspaper. It continues today. It's no longer daily in print version, but it's I don't think, maybe it is still print, but it definitely continues. It's definitely putting out content every day. And this one, though, is specifically from when internment camps were being established, connecting with the Japanese community of Los Angeles about that issue. Jorge Ramos, when we spoke with him, said one of the first things you need to do if you're going to collaborate with ethnic media is to understand that these roles are different. And, you know, he is very dramatic. People watch our news in order to survive in this country. I think I cut out a part where he said it's a matter of life and death. But he said we're providing essential information, and the civic and social orientation of our role is not often found in similar English programs. And this is an example from Univision from last week, which was addressed to Hondurans who had recently found that temporary protective status, which provided a temporary legal status in this country, was no longer going to be extended. What do you do next? It's very much speaking specifically to what happens next for you if you're affected by this. It's not a report about this issue, which you would have seen in the New York Times, for example. So I would ask you again, you know, how many languages are spoken in the newsrooms where you are? How many languages are spoken in the communities you try to cover? And I would say for most newsrooms, there is going to be an imbalance there. Most newsrooms covering any community that has some diversity in the United States. That's inevitable. The other question I would ask is, are you writing for or about these communities? It's often hard to do both. The story that Univision runs about temporary protective status is going to be different than the story the New York Times writes. But a collaboration can help you connect to both audiences and also think about, are you, and Karen, who you're going to hear from in a little bit, and I were talking about this, are you going in with sort of an anthropological approach, or are you actually thinking about the people who you're connecting with? The more connections you can make, the better you can do that. I would also argue that this is a specific time that it's very important to connect with ethnic media. I was moderating a panel a couple of weeks ago in Los Angeles where actually half the reporters were for mainstream press and half for Spanish language news. And particularly those for mainstream press were talking about how even though they had been covering these issues for more than a decade, it was particularly hard to get sources to speak with them today. That there was an environment of fear and people didn't want to connect with them. How do you connect to these communities that are being impacted and who are very important to hear from? So when we did the American Press Institute report that we worked on, we essentially found 3 different types of collaborations that we saw. And I'm going to also share with you through the panel that we're going to have in a moment 3 types of lessons. There's that essentially you team up to co-report. And how do you do that where there is a benefit for both parties in the reporting? Where it's not, for example, I as a mainstream media reporter going in and asking someone else for their context. One example that I thought was a good one recently came from WNYC and Telemundo about bogus ID cards. Tag teaming aided the reporting and it meant that they were better sourced from the WNYC perspective. And from the Telemundo perspective, WNYC was able to add some context. And then when the report came out, it actually reached a larger audience, both of those who were impacted and those who could make change. Similarly, one of the things we found is we talked to all of these newsrooms where they had a sister company within the same company. And you would think, okay, you have a Spanish language newspaper in a larger mainstream outlet, you're going to work together, right? Well, we often found they weren't working together. They're islands within the same newspaper. One place which was bridging the divide, I thought fairly well, was Al Dia and the Dallas Morning News, where there were editorial meetings together, working together on an interesting project in a community library, in libraries, a community outreach project that involved Facebook and targeting Latino parents via social media. And then finally, working with an outside organization that facilitates collaborations. A large ongoing study in California and Arizona has been around valley fever, which is a sickness that impacts particularly agricultural areas. And all of these different outlets work together to share resources and have really pushed for change on this issue. Now, 3 of the key lessons that came out, and we're going to talk about this with our 4 panelists who are fantastic journalists who have worked on these issues, but ways in which to co-report beyond a fixer relationship, connect with ethnic media to better cover your community, and to interpret, but not just to do translations. Many more details from the report can be found in this API report, so it is long, but I encourage you to check it out. And we have a 4th section that is going to be coming out shortly. I hope to be able to speak with many of you. It's very exciting to see so many of you have been involved in collaborations. And I hope tomorrow that I'll be able to speak with you and hear about some of your experiences and that you'll also share them in the discussion. Right now, though, and also, if you want to find out when that report is published, you can check out API's Need to Know newsletter, sign up for that, and they'll let you know, or you can follow me on Twitter, and I'll also let you know. So I am going to ask our panelists to come up right now. And while I do that, if you'd like to take a moment, if you've thought of a question already, now is a good opportunity to text the question to the word collab. Sorry. Text the question to the number and use the word collab. Can I have some hands for our panel here? Thank you. So I will say that Rong, who I'm going to introduce in a second, these are all very hardworking journalists, and Rong was filing until just about 5 minutes ago.
Just now.
And she also files 2,000 words every day.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And then after that, she comes here and talks with us. So the journalists you're about to hear from, I had the opportunity to meet all of you except for Orhan, or cross paths in some way about 15 years ago when I was covering immigration in the city. And all of you have been working on these issues and collaborating in different ways for many years. Rong is a reporter for Singtao, which is a Chinese daily in New York. Do you have any idea of the circulation or reach?
Well, I guess that's a commercial.
You're on mic.
A commercial secret, is it? No, I think they said it's 50,000. Yeah, 50,000 in the New York area, I think.
A day.
A day, yeah.
A day.
Because we're a daily newspaper, so that's the readership.
So I met Rong when I had first moved to New York. I was covering immigration, just like a mile maybe less from Chinatown. But for me, as a new reporter in New York, I really did not know much about Chinatown. And there was a service at the time called Voices That Must Be Heard that aggregated and translated ethnic media. It's now Voices of New York. And if you're interested in knowing about stories of immigrants in New York, it's a great resource. But I saw Rong's byline, and I emailed her. And she responded and helped me out with stories. Now, I like to think that I also credited you and linked, which I think is a very simple thing that reporters can do if you're working with someone. At the very least, link to the story where you got it from, because that really doesn't happen. Well, tell me, how often does it happen?
Yeah, it's not that often, but Danila must have done something right, because I remember that was a pleasant memory. So, yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, because I think there is, I don't know if I'm causing that, I think there is this, how do we do working together as journalists in a way that's not extractive, that's not a fixer relationship, but where you, as a reporter for Sing Tao, get something out of it as well as I do?
I guess, first of all, you have to be mutual respect, and don't. It often happened that ethnic media would be treated as a sideline in this kind of a relationship. And I can tell you, reporters from ethnic media outlets are kind of sensitive on this. If we work together, I wish we could discuss issues on a professional way, and as we are equal partners rather than I'm serving you. So that's one thing. And another thing is to be flexible, because a lot of things happen, especially with a daily newspaper. Things are constantly changing, and also with breaking news. It's not like all collaboration happen in a way that let's sit down to plan a project, that we can have you and me working on a project for a few months or something like that. What happened was, it often happened, was like this. Suddenly in Chinatown, there's a big murder, like a whole immigration family are kind of like killed by some strange guy. And when things like this happened, mainstream media reporters are often there as well, and we're there. So we could just hook up at the scene. And then, from there, you probably have a better connection with the police people. You get more information from them, and we have a deeper root in the community. And so we get some more like personal stories in our community, and we can combine. So I think this
does that happen?
Sometimes it happens, but it's not in a big scale. Like people like us, are kind of like counterparts in the mainstream are people like Daily News or the New York Post. Sometimes we do at the scene. The reporters decided that we can exchange some information, but this often happened with smaller. It's better chances to happen with smaller mainstream media outlets rather than the big ones. I do have this experience of some kind of like collaborative work almost happened with a big name newspaper. I won't name them, but so what happened later was like they kind of like treated us as competitors. At the same time, they wanted our help. So it's like they were trying to get information from us, but they kind of like guarded their own the sources or things. So we figured, we tested that, we felt it, and then so the whole thing just collapsed.
Can you tell me about, in contrast to that, what it was like for you? I know you worked recently on a massage with sex favors story that worked out better?
Yeah, this happened just earlier this year. There was a massage girl jumped out of the window of the third floor of her massage parlor during a police operation. So she was, we thought she probably was trying to run away from the police because she had some immigration issues. She didn't want to be arrested. But some other people argued she probably committed suicide. But anyway, so we did that story first, and then I helped Voices of New York to translate good stories from the Chinese media outlets. So I translated that story, and then Injustice Today probably saw the story on that website, the English version. So they contacted me at first. So Injustice Today, just for they're online news website focusing on police conduct and the justice system. So they contacted me, and at first they wanted me to be an interpreter, and I said okay. But then during the process, I helped them to translate their interview record and a lot of the material. But during the process, I found that during their interviews, there are a lot of questions they didn't ask, or probably they asked the answer that came out, because these people were talking about the family members of this masseuse. They didn't speak English at all. So when they were there, I was not there. The reporters from Injustice Today, they only speak English. So they used some kind of like online translation app. And there was a community leader there to help them as well, but the community leader didn't speak very well English, very good English either. So what happened was the reporters did ask some good questions, but the answers came up it didn't really kind of answer those questions, but they didn't know. The reporters didn't know. So during the process, when I translated this transcript, and I found, we need to know a lot of stuff. So I kind of like helped them to start to interview these family members. And also I gave them some suggestions from our culture perspective, like how should we approach them? What kind of questions should we ask? And if they answer your question in this way, what does this answer indicate? Because a lot of times you have to read between the lines. So I guess they probably feel it's very kind of like helpful. So they voluntarily gave me a contributor's byline at the end. For us, we also benefited from this because at first when we approached the story, we read it, we covered it just as this poor girl, immigrant, and she was struggling to make her ends meet, and then she jumped out of the window to her death. But then, while I was working with the reporters from Injustice Today, they were approaching the story from police misconduct, that perspective. So it turned out there were something fishy during the lifetime of this girl when she worked as a masseuse. She worked for probably a few years before she died. She was bullied by some undercover cops, and she was kind of like forced to provide free sex to undercover cops. So we thought, okay, probably we should expand our perspective, and we should do follow up the stories from a different angle. So we're kind of like broadening our vision as well.
Thank you, Rong. Can I ask the panelists to turn off your lav mics? Because they're doing a little bit of... Oh, they're going to turn them off.
Oh, you're going to.
Got it. I'm going to pass this over to you, Karen. So Karen Frillman is the executive editor of WNYC's Narrative Unit. If there's a podcast that you love right now coming out of WNYC, I think Karen's hand probably has something to do with it. She is an amazing editor at WNYC, and I had the opportunity of working with her when I came in to fill in as the immigration reporter after I left doing it at the New York Sun. And when I started there, she told me I had to listen to this piece. And she presented me with this Feet in Two Worlds CD of stories about New York. And I was hoping you could start by just telling us a little bit about what was that CD and how did that experience with Feet in Two Worlds mark a change in your approach?
Well, Feet in Two Worlds was started by a radio journalist who wanted to begin to teach reporters who were working in the ethnic press how to do public radio. Public radio, for a long time, we've wrung our hands that, we just can't find people from outside the usual sources to report for us. And that's been the excuse and the reason that a lot of the talent and a lot of the people that you hear on air do not come from and do not necessarily reflect the diversity that exists in the U.S. And so John Rudolph, who started Feet in Two Worlds, began to make contacts in the ethnic press and raise money and came to me. I was the editor of the newsroom at the time and said, can we collaborate? And I said yes. And so we found a group of stories that, and they were mostly soft stories. And I think this is, when you talk about collaboration, in terms of the kind of entry level, we didn't start with investigative work in this case. And so one of the stories was from a reporter from the Polish Daily News who was talking about the pharmacies in Williamsburg and how the pharmacies in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, really functioned as social centers and information centers, and and people would go in for diagnoses, and the pharmacist would give them medication, not prescription medication, and a lot of times homeopathic medication, but they had a very different relationship with these pharmacies. And so we did that story. We did a story about these video centers that are all over the city where people can speak on video to their relatives in Mexico or in El Salvador and can basically see each other. And families who have been separated for years can see their children who they in many cases haven't seen for as long as they've been here.
Which is amazing to think of now. I always think of that story because it was such a radical breakthrough that you could actually see. And now the technology has shifted so much since then.
That's right. The technology has changed, but at that time there was no FaceTime. I think that we did this series in, I want to say maybe 2006. And so, I had worked with Frank McCourt at one point when I was working in publishing, and so we sort of asked him as not as an ethnic journalist, but as somebody who had written a nonfiction memoir about the struggle to live in two places, to have an identity that was based in Ireland as well as being an American, and what that was like, and his personal life and the life of his family. So in the course of doing that, we just got into neighborhoods and told stories that gave our listeners insight into the city that they walk around in every day, and stories they don't see that are really in plain sight.
You've done many collaborations as a station. Is there anything that's different about doing collaborations with ethnic media reporters?
Well, because we work in radio, you have to translate your work to a radio report. And so there's that lift. If people have not worked if you're familiar with public radio, it's pretty formatted. There's a very particular style, for better or worse, I would say. But if you're going to run on Morning Edition or All Things Considered, which is where all of our pieces run, it's going to have to, be in that flow. And so accents are an issue, language is an issue, and so just being able to get a story over on the air, present a story in that way, gather tape, use a tape recorder. So I think that is part of the collaboration, but we have been invested in, if the story is right and if we want to do it, we do it. And in the case of this Polish reporter who was working with the Polish Daily News, the next piece we did with her was an investigation as we were looking at the anniversaries of 9/11, which essentially in New York, we sort of documented the first 10 anniversaries because it was such a major story. So every year we said, what story are we going to do? And in this case, Eva pitched a story about the Polish workers who were in the union that dealt with asbestos. There's a very specific union that does that cleanup, and a lot of the workers in it are Polish. Some of them were undocumented, had worked on the pile, had never been part of the health care that had gone to everybody that had been part of that. And so we really broke a story which won awards and to some extent shed a light on these workers. And so we sort of grew into that work with her, and started with something that was easier and then moved. So you sort of have to pick the right stories because we want to be successful. We want the reporter to be successful, and we want our listeners to have an interesting experience.
Thank you. Oni or Anthony Advincula most recently was the editor and national media outreach coordinator at New America Media. And I think I probably crossed paths with you first also when you were at the Independent Press Association of New York, and we're doing the translations and working on the aggregation, curation, connecting with ethnic media across the city for voices that must be heard. Most recently with New America Media, and New America Media, for those of you who don't know, worked on a national level for the past 45 years to work with ethnic media across the country. And they had to close for financial reasons last fall, which was a loss for collaborations and working with ethnic media. The last collaboration you worked on with New America Media was Voting Block, which was housed right here. Can you tell us a little bit about how Voting Block worked and what your role was?
So my role in that project is a little bit quirky. I'm the coordinator, I'm the facilitator, I'm part editor, I'm part crisis management person between the collaborators, and which is really a key. So Voting Block is a project between 5 ethnic media and a bunch of mainstream, including WNYC, to report on the gubernatorial elections here in New Jersey, the most recent one. So the most important for me, assuming that role, is to identify the collaborators. We did not choose Iran or Wrong because we like them. First the issue itself, right? So you have to look at it like, how does that impact a particular community? How many Turkish Americans are there in New Jersey? Is it big? How many Asian Americans, including Chinese and Filipinos, are in New Jersey? These are some of the qualifications when we chose the collaborators. And then also, the other key here is everybody should be on the same page. Like what Ron was saying, the idea that an ethnic media reporter would come up is very different from what actually this mainstream collaborator would like to do. That's not gonna work. So when we flesh out the ideas, I talked to most of them, Ron, to Oran, and 3 others. What are those story ideas? And so we have to look at it as not just something that relevant to the audiences that they serve, but also relevant to the general market in a larger community. And I asked them to write it in their own language. And the reason for that is because they know their own community. And the language itself, it's powerful when you have that command for that language. So they wrote it in their own language. And then I asked them also to translate it. We did not hire translators. If you hire a translator, and this is my experience, some of the nuances there are missed, or you're not going to see it, because the translator itself, especially if the translator is not coming from that community, the trajectory is kind of like very general, very mainstream, very broad. In order for that to be effective, I asked them to translate that into English. And then it did not stop there. We had to work on a daily basis to really edit it. So I edited it, came back to Iran and wrong. Here's the story. What are the missing here? Are the dots being linked? And I found out that sometimes if you generalize the idea, this happens to me all the time. If I write for a Filipino publication, I Filipinize it, right? The same story idea that I wrote for the Jersey Journal before, exactly the same story idea, but there's a really big background information that needs to be done. Like how many Filipino Americans, in Ron's case, I asked him, how many Turkish Americans are there? The general audiences would love to know, because this is about elections. Are they voting bloc? Can they be considered voting bloc? And this happened after the Muslim ban that Trump did. And also in the story, I remember this, we talked about this, Oran, it was done over dinner. Like, what were they eating? It gives an anthropological perspective that the general audience or general market would like to know. That the translator would probably, this is not going to work. This is too long already. This is not relevant. I'll just delete it, right? Or edit it out. And then at the same time, you go back to the mainstream collaborator in a way that is, the story is already written in a way that is attractive to them. I mean, attractive is, I don't like to use that word, but somehow follows the rules, right, that they do follow. So now it becomes generalized, but somehow did not, miss out on a lot of the information that the original story. If you look at it, then there are two stories. The version of the Turkish and the Chinese, somehow different, but the same concept. That concept is not altered. And then when you read the English, if you completely do a Google Translate, it will not be the same. That's where the interpretation comes in. I think I have to stop that there.
I'm going to come back to you on that in a second. Orhan, can you tell us a little about yourself and also about Zaman America, the newspaper that you report for here?
Yeah. I used to work for the Zaman America. Right now, I am working for the Zaman America as a volunteer. We have been struggling since March 2016, after the government seized our company in Turkey, headquarter company in Turkey, in Istanbul. We had the financial struggle. We started struggle at that time, actually. So after the coup attempt in 2016, July 2016, we had to shut down our newspaper because after the government closed down our newspaper headquarters, it's affect us financially. we were dependent on financially to headquarters. Back in 2016, we were 4 reporters and 1 editor. And right now, nobody's working for the Zaman America anymore, unfortunately. They had to, the reporters and the editor is doing another job, and because they had to find another job to live in the United States. So we were the biggest newspaper in Turkey, so right now we shut down everything. So it's sad. But right now we have the website. So far we are trying to keep it alive. So we had the collaborative articles. We have been in contact with you and with Oni and with Stephanie a few times. So trying to keep the Turkish community here alive, to give them the news actually. So after the coup attempt, I just would like to summarize it fast. After the coup attempt, 319 journalists has been arrested in Turkey. So more than 180 outlets, media outlets, had shut down by the government. So thank God I live here. Thank God I am doing journalism here. I'm trying to keep my work here. Even our Twitter account have withheld in Turkey. We cannot tweet anything against the Turkey. So our situation right now is as I expressed. So,
in contrast to, I mean, such a stark situation, such a dire situation in Turkey, I am curious, did this opportunity to collaborate here, what did this mean to you? How did it impact your trajectory here?
Yeah. First of all, we had a chance to continue communicate with Turkish community here. Without this project, I don't think I would ask any Turkish community and Turkish people about the government election, local election. So when we got this project, and when the ONI called me and we got this project, we started the project, I was looking for some Turkish who is interested in politics in local election. So I found them, I met with them. I met with them a few times. I had with them the dinner. So I told them about the politics and the government election. So it was good. It was actually great. They were very happy because they, not in Turkish, and we translated in English and we write it down in English again. So it's separate. I just saw the article even in another website. So, which is, they were surprised when they saw their picture in another website, which was great. For me, it was good experience. Even not just language. Of course, most of the time we spend our time to spend writing in Turkish, not in English. With this project and that kind of project, we have chance to write in English and to see how it's come out in English websites. So we reach the more audience, more expanded our platform. So Turkish people had the chance to pay attention to, I mean, the local and some English website as well.
So I think now is a good time to see if there are questions and to include everyone in this discussion.
So if anyone in the audience has questions here, we're going to start with folks who are here and might have a question for the panel or for Daniela. So who would like to start? Who wants to start? Over here. Thank you.
Eve Oppenheim, freelancer. Just wondered, what do you have to do to protect your sources? And is it any different from any other kind of media coverage?
To protect your sources as an ethnic media reporter or as in a collaboration?
perhaps some kind of like the standard or the protocol at our place is a little different from the mainstream media. For example, we don't always require you to have a full name and the age. This really helpful. This is really helpful in cases like you're dealing with some sensitive news. So we don't have that pressure at all. But sometimes when I work as a freelancer for the English language media, or as a collaborator with the mainstream media, I do feel I had that pressure. No matter what the story is, they always want a full name and an age.
To be honest, right now we are, we have some Turkish people, they escape from the Turkey because many of you know what's happening right now in Turkey. When we write the articles about any community, so they don't give their name, even they don't give what they live. So when I was running one story for the Voice of New York, so they asked me, if you want, you cannot give their exactly name. You can just write another name, but the story should be the same. The story should be 100% true, but the name you can, just change their name because of their security. So that's very important for them. Why? Because they have relatives in Turkey, so they cannot take any risk.
Another question. I have a question for the group too while I'm walking over here. One of the things that we think a lot about, and I admit I'm not good at, and I know some of the editors we work with in the mainstream media aren't good at, is thinking through what's an equitable partnership, which is very different than even just being equals at the table. What tips would you have that we could help give to editors at mainstream American publications when they're thinking through how to partner with ethnic media in a way that is equitable for you and for them, but for you, because a lot of times that doesn't happen.
Even just a simple byline, for every reporter, right? Whether you're an ethnic media reporter or a general mainstream media reporter, a byline somehow gives you that confidence, right? That you've done that work. We work with a top dog publication, all of you have read, and it failed because the editors were just like getting the story ideas from the ethnic media, and there was not even a byline, not even a tagline at the bottom, like a so and so contributed to this reporting at least, So then that's not fair to begin with. The other one is to really talk about, to be in sync, like Rong was saying about earlier, different story idea. You can't do that because then you make the ethnic media reporter blindsided what you're actually going to do. And also proper attribution. If you get it from the ethnic media, then say it. According to Turkish or Saman America, there are so and so. Why can't that be, complicated? So little things like that really help.
And I think working we know in radio when we put our reporting out there and sometimes newspapers pick it up and don't give us credit. So we are a little bit sensitive about that because, we'll pick up the New York Times and it's like, we had that story and there's no mention of our reporting and they've re-reported it or whatever. So we have come to a point where for us, we want our story out there. So we want to be on your site. We want you on our site. Our goal is to get the word out there. I think we're not saying that when we break a story, we certainly want to break it, but we don't want to take somebody else's breaking story. And so our goal is to get it out. So when we collaborate, if we're collaborating with ProPublica or the Marshall Project or Feet in Two Worlds, everything gets posted everywhere, and people get credited. That's our goal.
One question to build on that I had for Rong when we were talking about this before is, so for instance, for Feet in Two Worlds, one of the reporters who worked on it got hired by WNYC right away. Now, that benefited the reporter, and he was very happy about it. But did it hurt the publication where he was before? And I thought you had an interesting answer to that. One that had to do with visas, which was that most people wouldn't leave. It had something to do with immigration visas. But then also that for you personally, being able to do both actually keeps you at Tsingtao because it enriches your career.
Yeah, I'm an example that I didn't leave. I have been working for Tsingtao for more than 15 years, although I've done a lot of collaborative or freelance works for the mainstream media or English language media as well. I think one of the problems, the challenges reporters, journalists working for ethnic media is there aren't so many opportunities. We write for our own newspaper in a different language that most of the people in this country don't understand. And the impact that we can make is only so much. So this is the very reason that now we're seeing a lot of young talents. They joined our industry and then they leave very quickly because they don't see hope, they don't see the future. I think my experience is while you do freelance work for English language media or collaborative, whatever you call it, you feel like you are fulfilling your journalism dream. Some of my stories did make changes after it was published by an English publication. And the first story I did for New York Daily News, that was about some people in Chinatown, small businesses in Chinatown, was cheated by a utility company based in Canada. That was before I did that for the Daily News, I did several pieces for Tsingtao on that issue. Nothing changed. The company in Canada didn't care at all. When I say, hey, I'm a reporter from Tsingtao Daily, they would say, what? What's Tsingtao Daily? And then when I told them, now I'm doing the story for the New York Daily News, guess what? God, it's so different. They immediately called me back saying, we're forming this committee particularly to investigate on this issue. And then after the story was published, all of those people who were cheated were refunded. So, now, that's the reason that I stay at Tsingtao, because I feel even if I stay within ethnic media, I'm making change. I'm doing things that I want to do.
Hi, I'm Uriah Kaiser here with Lion Publishers, and the Protecting Your Sources story. The question, I wanted to go the other way with it. So, do you have any sort of best practices that you can talk about when you're working with, another journalist, both of you bringing your own relationships and sources to the table, and maybe there's an instance where a part of the story is moving and the one reporter who has that source isn't available that day, or is at a doctor's appointment with their children, or whatever the reason may be. Can you talk about some best practices that you have in managing the pieces of the story and how you work together on that?
So I think it's communication, right? And it's just clear communication. I'm not sure if anyone has any other insights or specific communication practices.
Would you approach a source that wasn't yours, or
It didn't come up in a report. I can say personally, if I'm working with someone else, if I'm working with Rong on something and it's her source, I'm going to ask her before I approach the source. I think that's what I would do, and I'm assuming you would do that.
Yeah, of course. But most of the times it's more like we are the one who provided sources. So, it's rarely happened that I do need to approach a source that I get from a mainstream media. That's the very purpose that they come to us, I guess.
And really, I think on some of these stories where sources don't really want to come forward in those kinds of sensitive areas, we rely on, that reporter to help us do that. So it's not beneficial for us to do it to continue to get the story. But as Danielle says, it's communication. It depends on how long people have been reporting, and it's all I would say it's each circumstance is different.
Orhan, did you want to?
Just want to add one thing. When we get this project, I ask some Turkish people around me. I'm writing a story about the election. One of the guy told me, I just got called actually from the New York Times to ask me about the election. What do you think about the election? So I asked him, what did you say? He said, I didn't say anything. I said, why? He said, I don't trust him. I don't know him. So I said, this is the New York Times. He said, I don't know him. He called me from the New York Times and asked me some questions. I asked him if I'm going to ask you if I'm going to write your name. He said, totally fine. Just do it. But if I don't know any journalist, so I don't want to give any comment. So that's the ethnic media is the key role, I think.
Yeah, that's a good question. Oni, did you have another?
Yeah, so just real quick. While ethnic media, well, let me frame it this way. The biggest benefit that the mainstream media would get is accessibility, right, to sources from the ethnic communities. But please do not use that as like they are inside informants. They're not. They are collaborators. They know they know their communities, but they're not going to put their communities in a harm's way, right? And the other part there is you're actually going to benefit it because you will expedite the story. Rather than looking for your sources for 6 months, Wrong knows, all the nail salons, probably, all those people who go for iftar dinner for like probably in 2 weeks. So, budget-wise, you save money, you save time, and at the same time, you get the real source coming from the community. But please, they're not the mole, right? They are from their community. They're the first responders of their community.
Thanks, Oni. So we have a couple questions from Ground Source. I'm going to let Simon ask one of them, and then next we've got a question from Dave, and up front with Jane.
So the first question is from Pat at WDT. Thanks, Pat. A mainstream editor might have concerns about presenting an ethnic story because the mainstream audience might not, quote, get it or care about it. How would an editor who really wants to tell that story overcome that and make it something that the audience will like and want more of?
Well, I always say I'm the first listener, to a story, and I'm, so if I don't get it, then, I'll say, all right, how do we get, the reporter will say, no, you have to understand. I mean, this is happening, this happens all the time. In a certain way, there's language, there's trends, there's slang, there's pop culture phenomenon in different communities. And so that's just storytelling and reporting. That's then finding a style of talking about it so it doesn't sound like exactly like you're explaining it to, your mother or father, but that's really the art of telling a good story, so that, because you are broadcasting, we're broadcasting. We don't know who's going to tune in. I mean, we are transmitters on the Empire State Building, and it's a broadcasting network. So we have an obligation for clarity. And so that's just then, but yet it's great to introduce people to something they don't understand so that they're in the know. And so that's really just finding the language, finding the storytelling, finding a style to get that over. Because we want our audience to be in the know. That's why we want people to come back, because they've learned something new, I mean, and that's every organization right now is trying to do that.
Anyone else on that question?
I would just add just one line. I think if possible, maybe you really want to go through with us and have one of us to read it through before we publish, because the sensitivity spots of people are so complicated now, especially now, and even within the same community, the Chinese community. You don't know how many times that I cover stories that the second generation and the first generation fight against each other, and people who are born in the U.S. fight against the people, newcomers from the mainland China. So even one community is not just one person. It's a diverse. Every community is kind of diverse. So I kind of like, I do understand the feeling that you're worried about, to touch the sensitivity taboo place. I think really it's good to be careful and to go through someone who are insider of the community.
Great. We have a question.
I'm struck with equity, the idea of equity, and I see how you can get a greater access if you can say you're also reporting this for the New York Daily News. But I also know there's even though the mainstream media may bemoan their economic fortunes, it's still comparing apples to apple orchards in terms of many ethnic media positions. So have any of you worked with a nonprofit that, in terms of equity afterward, would consider writing you into a grant or consider helping you with a grant that could help fund you afterwards, in another way? I think the compensation is very much controlled by the most powerful partners sometimes, and I don't know, Karen's shop has some very good grant writers, or they have other, I don't know if that's ever happened. And Anthony or Ron, maybe you know.
Yeah,
I guess mine is different because when I work with No American Media, basically that's one of our backbone projects. So we provided fellowships to ethnic media reporters to work on stories. In fact, the voting block, it came out of a fellowship. And sometimes it's not like a rigorous application type. We just cherry pick because we built these relationships with them. We know these people. We just cherry pick. Okay, one would be an Arab reporter. The other one would be a Filipino reporter. So yes, and the funders they've been phenomenally helpful about this. And there are so many stories that they would have not had that opportunity to report on if not for that fellowship.
The equitable equity question is a large one, and it's something we saw also even within the same company, right? So if you look at how much reporters make at OI, for instance, versus the LA Times, or LD versus Dallas Morning News, and it was brought up as well, this question of how can you fund these initiatives in a way that people are being compensated more equally for their work. The fellowship model is one. I'm not sure if you have ideas for others.
Yeah, I have to tell you, not only that we don't make as much as the mainstream media journalists, the stories I do, the deeper ones, thorough, investigative, or whatever you call it, I always use my own time because we have to do 2,000 words every day, and they can't, even if I have a long-term project, they don't have the luxury to offer me the time. So I kind of like donate my own time, my own vacation. I spend a lot of vacation days on my projects. So the fellowships and grants as well are very, very important. That's why when New American Media fell, we were so sad because they were at that time the only one that do nationwide kind of fellowships. Now you have CUNY CCEM. They are offering some kind of fellowships as well. And Sandy Close from New American Media is still doing some type of services under a new brand called Ethnic Media Service. but in a much smaller scale. So basically, right now, there's no nationwide organizations that will offer such opportunities. I mean, I've been in Singapore for 15 years. I have basically done all those fellowships that's open to ethnic media. But the young reporters and the newcomers, they don't have opportunities anymore. And it seems like the future is even narrower and narrower. And that's a very depressing thing that we're seeing now.
Well, I think we're getting late in the evening, but I just wanted to make a couple of comments. My name is Jane Regan, and I've worked in the U.S. in community media, but also I spent many years in Haiti. And when you talk about the so-called ethnic media and the parachuting / faux collaboration or whatever, I would call it more extractive work that the mainstream media does with your outlets. It reminds me a lot of Haiti, where you're working there every day for how many years in a row, and then somebody parachutes in from the LA Times and the New York Times. So I just want to make a couple of comments and also make a pledge for us to not feel depressed, but to feel strong. Because what we're calling the so-called ethnic media is you're the media of what is soon to be the majority in this country. And in fact, I think that one thing we should do going forward is to eliminate that term, ethnic media. I'm Anglo / Irish, American, whatever. That's an ethnicity. That's an ethnic. We all have an ethnicity. Why is the Tsingtao Daily an ethnic media and the New York Times isn't? So that's one of my little things I wanted to say. The other thing is I wanted to say that this whole idea of this extraction and this gaining of accessibility through your hard work and your existing in a community. There's no way you all and all of people working for the outlets you work for, there's no way you can really form some kind of a union. But again, I think that fighting against the term fixer and saying you demand double byline, period, because they wouldn't get the access without, and they wouldn't get the authenticity without your collaboration, whether it's as an individual or as a media outlet. Again, can you form a union? Can you make a rule? No. But can you talk to your pals when you go out for tea or dinner or beers or whatever? Yes. And when I was in Haiti, I was one of several fixers. I was the only non-Haitian fixer, alleged fixer, because I rarely did it, but I did it once in a while. I did it for the Village Voice because I thought that they were worth it. But I refused to let them use that term, and we would not let people use the term. We said, just call me my name. And then I want a byline. Is it a double byline? Is it what you said, Anthony, like a name at the end of the article? I don't care. But it's got to be fair. And I think that that's a start of something to go forward. The idea is to have impact on this country and on the planet, and to change things and to keep working for progressive social change. And we got to stick up for ourselves while we're sticking up for all these communities that we're reporting on. And the last thing that I would say is there's actually a thing in scholarship called native reporting. And it's this kind of scholarship, PhD level recognition of what those of you who live in these communities and work in these communities, whether you work as taxi drivers or you're making crepes or you're harvesting bananas or you're reporters, you have something that the New York Times and the Fox News or whoever, or BBC, they don't have. And so it's just a matter, I think, of at the same time as we're working for progressive social change in our communities and in our own media outlets, you got to stick up for yourselves as individuals. What really surprises me about a lot of journalists, especially investigative journalists, we're all excellent at sticking up for others, and sometimes we sort of don't have much left to stick up for ourselves. But it kind of goes part and parcel with the same thing if we're going to survive. So I just want to salute everyone for all the work you've done so far to helping make the world and this country, too, a better place. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Other questions from the audience now? And Simon, where did you go? I think we have another question from Ground
Yes,
Surf.
we do. Just magically appear out of nowhere. One moment, let me scroll up to it. This is from Tara George, who's a professor here. Thanks, Tara. Do ethnic media reporters often face greater risks in their reporting than their mainstream media collaborators? Of course, I'll speak up too. Do ethnic media reporters often face greater risks in their reporting than their mainstream media collaborators?
I think what's challenging about that question is that ethnic media is such a diverse group. And so I could imagine that certain groups do, but I don't know that we could say that ethnic media overall faces greater risks.
I think that's definitely the case because, first of all, you don't have a good insurance, as good as your mainstream colleagues. And secondly, and all this sorts of other protections like libel and this and that, in our newspaper, we have to be responsible for ourselves. If we got into trouble, nobody really protect us. We have to face the legal lawsuits or something like that. Well, legal lawsuits aside, even during daily works, like if we make phone calls to say the mayor's office or some big shots and asking for comments, they won't reply. They won't we don't know your newspaper. If I'm the press person, my boss don't read your newspaper. So why should I bother to work with you? So we have to be very persistent, and we have to maybe make 100 phone calls like that. Only two people call you back. So yeah, it is a much tougher life.
As an ethnic media member, of course, you have so many pressure from the community. Like our just revenue is from the advertisement. I am talking about our publication. We are in Turkish, so we should get the advertisement in Turkish from the Turkish businessman. So if you have any chance to reach out to all of them, so to get the good advertisement, so which is good for our website, which is good for our revenue. But on the other hand, we have another problems, as my Francis just mentioned. We are by our own because we should pay our all legal fee, as she said. If we have any problems, we have to pay our healthcare insurance as well. So that's why we are, so different from the mainstream media as well. And when we are in New York, we have the Daily News, we have the New York Times, we have the Wall Street Journal. Who cares about your publications? So even they don't care about your publications until you publish your articles in mainstream media. So
also makes me think of something that Oni and Sandy used to do frequently, to Rong's point, is to help organizing fellowships that provided access to decision makers, because sometimes going together in a partnership or even with a mainstream media organization, I know made a difference. We had something in Atlantic City here in New Jersey. I remember that you helped organize that, helped that.
And I think it depends on the community. The smaller the community, the harder actually it is, because like what he was saying, the business depends on that community. If you say something bad about a business person there who's sort of influential, then the one that's going to suffer is your publication, right? Because it's a smaller. But for the Chinese community, I think that would be a different scenario, because it's a larger population, especially in the New York City area.
Great. I think we're just about ready to wrap up. We're just a little bit over time. Are there any final questions before any final comments from the panel? You're right in the middle, of course. Thank you.
My name is Jason Khan from Stuyvesant High School. My question is, many journalists I know devote their lives to informing others for the general good of their communities or general populace. how does this broad mission vary between smaller ethnic media journalists and mainstream journalists?
So do you want to speak to how the mission you feel like, what do you feel like the mission of Tsingtao is?
I think in terms of that, we probably are we're more responsible to kind of like help our community to, to bigger good, or, because we have to provide them the information. And a lot of our readers are new immigrants. They know nothing about this country. We have to help them get through the process of kind of like assimilate into this country. And after a generation of readers have already done that, they melt into the so-called mainstream, they would no longer read us. We're kind of, because then after they can read English, they'll get their information from the English language media. And then we'll go back to start to kind of like serve the new wave of new immigrants. So I feel sometimes we're like both person, like to help them again and again, and only to help them to leave us, not to keep them. And also another note is, Danila, you mentioned advocacy media, and I'm thinking sometimes any media, your responsibility is to serve your readers. And this reader group sometimes is defined by ethnicity, like us. But some other times it's defined by geography. So I was thinking the New York Daily News and New York Post would advocate for New Yorkers anyway. So when you read their stories, say if there's a big train or airplane accident happened in London, the New York Post and New York Daily News would definitely focus on any New Yorkers who died or injured in that accident. What we do is no different. It's just like, because our readers are Chinese language readers, so we have to serve their benefits, their interest, and we have to always focus on them.
And I would just say that, having worked with a lot of different journalists, I think there are certain journalists who feel a calling to actually do their work in a certain way, and to say, I want this story to really get under somebody's skin. I want somebody to read that story and not be able to stop thinking about it. I want somebody to understand what it's like to, come into New York with $5 in their pocket, or the fear of deportation, or whatever the story is. And I think I think that happens within the ethnic press, and I think that happens within the mainstream press. And I think you really see it when I don't know how many people here are journalism students, but this is an individual choice. And it is those people who work on their vacations and who work at night and who work those extra hours to find that edge of the story that really brings in the humanity of it. Because that's what journalism can do. It can be transformative. You can change people's minds with a story, but not everybody practices it that way in any medium. And it can be done. It's a challenge, but I just think in a way that's individual journalists who take that on.
I think that your question, if you look at it, it's whether we are biased, because the question is, how are we different, in terms of our reporting? The perspective of the story is always through the lens of the community, right? The stories that they produce or we produce, it's news that these people can use, new immigrants, people of color. That's the perspective of the story. But I don't think it's biased. You may call it slanted or biased, but the way we see it, it's not. I see the back door of that question, which is very important. What Rong was saying was, like the New York Post, they look for New Yorker passengers and they report about it. Same thing with ethnic media. You know, if there is a Chinese person who was, you know, part of the bombing or a victim of the bombing, they're going to report it. You know, same thing with immigration. They're not going to write about deportation, putting that, let's say, a Filipino family, you know, to feed it to the ICE. Of course, the story's perspective would be, you know, for that family, you know, facing deportation. So I think it's a matter of how you see it. But I really like your question. I really do. It's so meaty.
Just want to add some example. It was a few weeks ago, shooting in high school, Florida. So when we heard this news, of course we saw the name and how many victims there are. But we were looking for the Turkish student. Is there any Turkish student there? Because when we write the story through the Turkish people, through the Turkish, so we are getting more attention because everyone is looking for their ethnicity. So when we look at it, we saw we got 2 students in the school, but they didn't get any hurt. So as you said, everyone is looking for their people in community, in ethnic media.
Let's give our panel a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Daniela, too, for a wonderful keynote presentation. Any final thoughts before I close for the evening?
No, I just really look forward to speaking to all of you tomorrow and learning more about the projects that you've been working on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you to our panel.
Thank you. So just a couple things before you head out. Breakfast is at 8 a.m. tomorrow. The jazz trio's gone. The drinks are gone. But we have wonderful dining options in Upper Montclair and downtown Montclair if you're not from the area. I know there are a lot of people going back to the La Quinta. If you want to lift together, maybe you can gather near the door and discuss that too. Don't forget we do have a lift coupon, 2018 Collab J. And I will see everyone in the morning. Breakfast is at 8, presentations at 9. Have a good night.